Welcome to the Bicurian podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is Bicurian, you ask?
Well, you may not necessarily have a mental concept of Bicurian, partially maybe because it's a made-up word. You embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the Bicurian moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the Bicurian.
Welcome to Bicurian.
I'm Aisla.
And I am Eric. And this week we have a very special guest. We recorded a conversation with Representative Jared Polis, somebody you had worked with previously in your past life.
In my past life. It makes it sound like a reincarnation.
It kind of is.
Back before I was born.
Or when you were doing something different than what you've been doing now.
Yes, that is true. I was the executive director for Out Boulder, Out Boulder's LGBTQ community center for 6 years. And when I was working there, I had the opportunity to work with Jared on a variety of things and just actually get to experience him in the community, which was really interesting.
Yeah, that's what I find most interesting. He's become a congressman representing Colorado and is now running for governor of Colorado, but you knew him before all of that.
Yeah, well, and about a year before is when I started working at Out Boulder. And it's funny, I know that when we first met, and I would tell you that I was doing things like canvassing for Jared. You were like, why would you do that?
No, I honestly, I wasn't super familiar. And
not that you were against Jared, but just sort of that, like, that's a lot of talking to strangers.
Yeah, no, I'm not much of a...
you do a podcast, you do talk to strangers.
Yeah, but I do it from behind a microphone.
It's
so
true.
Much easier.
Talking in a microphone is harder than talking to people directly in my world. The microphone thing has been a process.
That's interesting. So, without further ado, we're going to play our conversation.
Sounds good.
We're really excited to have you on the show. Perhaps you can introduce yourself and give us a little bit of the elevator pitch on why you're running for governor.
Sure. So I'm Jared Polis, honored to represent Northern Colorado in Congress for a decade, and before that was on the State Board of Education and started several schools to serve at-risk youth. And you know what? I just think Colorado's an amazing state. I was born here. We're raising our 6-year-old and our 4-year-old here, and a lot's at stake this election where Colorado... you can either, choose my approach, which is an independent, thoughtful approach to leadership, or they could elect a Donald Trump yes man. And it's really a crossroads for a state that in many ways is a microcosm for many of the national divides.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and, obviously I had the privilege and honor of working with you in Boulder several years ago. And that experience with you is actually really why I wanted to have you on the show. For us, the Bicurian concept is this concept of embracing the contradictions of being human. And you've always been such a great representative of being a bridge builder, both in community and within yourself. And one of the things that I have seen a lot is in politics, or even just in general, there's this assumption that progressive values are sort of these unattainable ideals, and that being practical means not living up to your values. And yet you managed to, at least in my experience, have really progressive values while also implementing them in these really practical ways. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you achieve that, maybe so other people can learn how to achieve that.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, Aisla, because I think, our listeners here, if they vote, will not likely be voting for my opponent, but the question is, will they vote, right? Will you care enough? Does Jared Polis excite you? And the issue may be, look, he may not be perfect on every progressive issue, and I think the point to make, Aisla, is it's not necessarily because of my beliefs or what I want to do. But when you're an elected official and you operate within the realm of the possible of the elected, yes, you're trying to move towards the right direction. And that often means compromise. It often means watering down things that, but at least taking a step forward. And so, you have to have a realistic bar for our elected officials. We certainly judge them based on their values and on their results. But part of getting results is being willing to work across the aisle, across differences, to try to move in the right direction. And there's just such a stark contrast this election and enormous differences between candidates up and down the ballot on every issue, ranging from equality to gun safety to protecting our environment. And, for individual voters and listeners, I get that some Democrats might not be pure enough on every issue, but the light and day difference between sort of the progressive vision and the candidates that espouse it and this Trumpian vision of moving backwards is really starker than it's ever been before, and I hope that everybody votes.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I know I've always really respected about you is you're actually willing to say when there's something that is clearly too far. I don't know if too far is the wrong word. Like, it's an ideal, and sure, we want to achieve that. And you're willing to say, it's not going to happen tomorrow. Like, we can have a 20-year plan. Right. We can have a 30-year plan. And if you're going to ask me to do this thing tomorrow, I'm going to disappoint you right now and say it's not happening. And I feel like that's something we need more of. And yet, at the same time, I know that you've gotten flack for it. And at the same time, I really respect that, because we need that kind of clarity and honesty so we can actually work on the things that are achievable now.
That's right. And to really, protect what keeps Colorado special and amazing, work on building a renewable energy future, work on improving funding for our schools. And one of our big areas of focus is making sure every child can go to free full-day preschool and kindergarten. So these are the things that we want to accomplish. Now, in our first term, in our first session, as an example, I think we have a good likelihood of getting from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten. We probably won't get universal preschool right away, but we can increase the number of slots and try to get more support for at least half-day preschool over the first couple of years. But yeah, we want to be able to point to real solid accomplishments. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get everything that you run on and want to do in your first week in office, but I'll never give up fighting for a better and more inclusive future for our state.
Yeah, it's one of the things that definitely has drawn me to following your political career. And when I met Isla, she had mentioned her history with you, and I was very intrigued. So, again, it's a pleasure to meet you and actually hear this stuff from you. So one of the things that I was actually looking at...
I still haven't made it over to board game night at Isola's house, so you'll have to take a rain check on that, Isla, for at least a little while.
It's at some point, probably
when you're less
like
busy.
60.
Yeah, when you're less busy,
Yeah.
You're absolutely welcome. I did, we could pick any subject. Like, you can turn on CNN and we could just throw a dart at a board here for different things. But I was kind of curious, because this seems to be the news of the week and has been for a little while with the tariff situation. I'm hearing a lot of news about how that's going to affect agriculture, and we are an agricultural state here in Colorado. Maybe you can give a little bit of your opinion on that sort of situation, how that's affecting real families, real farmers across the country and here.
Yeah, it has a real impact on families, farms who are barely able to get by and support themselves as it is. It's very important that we have a governor that works to expand access to markets, both domestically, locally, and internationally, for grown in Colorado products. So I also think, while, again, these tariffs are damaging, there's a real political opening for Democrats, myself, and others to really get the message in agricultural communities where they may not agree with Democrats on everything, but in eastern Colorado, it's a really important economic message that I'll stand to expand markets for grown in Colorado products, which will help, in turn, put food on the table of our farmers.
Yeah, like I said, it's a kind of a hot button issue, but it's one of those things. I work in the tech industry. the tariffs don't necessarily affect us, although immigration policies and visas do, because our office is in Tel Aviv as well as here in Colorado.
Well, and before we think they don't affect tech, careful, because it's coming for tech. When you look at China, you look at iPhones, you look at computer parts, there's absolutely an effect across the economy as this potential trade war worsens. So while some of the first casualties and people who are harmed are farmers, users of steel, there's no question that if we continue in this direction, it'll affect industries like tech with simple things like the cost of chips, iPhones, computer supplies going up, which hurts the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in some ways, I think my brain's been focused on the kind of the immediate impacts, hearing farmers that have crops they feel like they can't sell right now. But you're absolutely right. It is going to be kind of wider, and I think we're all kind of, the public right now is kind of taking it in, how bad and how significant it could be.
Yeah.
Okay,
Jared. Did I cut you off, Jared?
What's that?
Did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. Another sort of, and you mentioned the sort of the Trumpian perspective, and in a larger sense, I feel like another sort of bicurian experience I've had is, as I've been watching this political stage unfold, is there's a lot of folks in our current president as well that seem to get elected and represent their party, and they sort of seem to forget that they're actually representing a larger constituency. And I feel like my experience of you has always been, what you were talking about. You're on the school board, you founded schools, you've always had that larger perspective. And I'm just wondering, like, how did you, in the face of a culture that kind of is that more like stick with your own, how did you develop sort of that awareness of, I know if you were governor, you wouldn't be just the governor for the Democrats. You would be the governor for the people who didn't vote, and the Republicans, and the independents, and the libertarians, and you would listen to what people had to say. So how did you develop that?
Well, it starts by just sort of realizing we're all affected by the policies. I mean, when you're stuck in traffic and your 15-minute commute that 10 years ago is now a 35-minute commute, it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or independent or Democrat. You want a governor that's going to do something about it, right? The kids of Republicans, independents, Democrats, Greens, Libertarians all go to our schools, right? So it's more about what we have in common. I enjoyed working on the State Board of Education. It's still a political environment, but it's a less partisan environment. I mean, in many ways, the political system is how we work out our differences and find common ground. But when you add the partisan level on top of it, it only gets people dug in. So certainly my focus will be, caring just as much about, people across the ideological, geographic spectrum. And in fact, if you look at who some of my opponent, Walker Stapleton's policies would hurt the most, in many ways, it's many rural Republicans. If you look at ending the Medicaid expansion as an example, which Walker Stapleton supports, that would throw hundreds of thousands of Coloradans off their health care. The highest percentage of those served by Medicaid are in many of our rural counties. And in those counties, it's not only a matter of not having access to health care. In many cases, our rural providers themselves can't even stay in business or be viable without having that Medicaid expansion to help keep them serving those communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Time for one more question?
Sure.
So one thing that I was actually curious about, and I think our listeners would love to hear about, you've been in Washington, you've been representing Colorado, but on the national stage. In what ways do you see kind of a difference in how things are going to transition, as you started looking at the governorship as opposed to the representative?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to have a governor that's not beholden to Donald Trump or any president in Washington, and we'll always put Colorado first, and I always will. I'm ready to kind of roll up my sleeves and get to work on a forward-looking agenda, right? I mean, just sort of, opposing Donald Trump's efforts to, villainize immigrants and other things isn't enough. You also need a forward-looking vision, like our goal to improve our schools, to make healthcare more affordable and expand coverage, to protect our environment and protect our parks and open space. And we have a lot of those plans, and with a good degree of detail at polisforcolorado.com that your listeners can check out or interact or provide any comments on.
Thanks. Is there anything that you would want to share or let people know about your vision, what inspires you, what you see? I mean, I know there's all the things that you have so much out there that could certainly go find that, but anything in this moment that feels particularly relevant?
Well, again, that's a good one to end on. And as I started, I was born here, we're raising our kids here. Colorado's an amazing state, but how do we make sure it not only stays great, but gets even better? And that means in the face of growth, doing something about traffic, including multimodal transportation and mass transit. It includes making sure our schools are the best, starting with preschool and kindergarten, protecting our parks, our open space, really our public lands. They really are an iconic part of who we are as Westerners and as Coloradans. They're under threat from special interests that want to carve them up and sell them off. So, I mean, in many ways, it's just a fork in the road, and it's a choice of what direction Colorado wants to go. I would be honored to kind of continue this forward-looking, innovative spirit that characterizes our state and really try to make our economy work for everybody to improve our quality of life.
Sounds good to me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for making time today. And before we let you go, I want to bring a highlight to something you said earlier for our listeners and for anyone else. Now is not the time to not vote. As you mentioned, our listeners are probably the type that probably will vote for you, but it's key. Everybody needs to get out and actually vote, especially in the midterm election coming up.
Yeah, don't assume somebody else is going to take it on for you. Make it happen.
Thank you for having me on, and have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Bicurian Moment.
So, this week, in lieu of the fact that we had a political figure, and I admit that I don't have a lot of experience in dealing with political figures, mostly I just give my opinion to other people who have far less influence than that. But it really made me think about politics just in general. We obviously cover a lot of political subject matter on this show, and it's hard not to, because everything can be politicized. Okay, so if we're going to talk about bisexuality, people being trapped at the border. I'm just going through the list in my head, and like all of them have a political aspect. But one of the things that really stuck out to me in this is that politicians are human.
There are people, yeah, trying to do a job,
right? Trying to do a job, and I think it's easy to get an us versus them mentality, especially when we're talking about politicians on the opposite side of the fence from our beliefs. But in general, kind of the premise of this show and being Bicurian and understanding knee-jerk reactions and kind of looking deeper into things, people are people, whether they're a politician or a construction worker or a call service agent, whatever kind of job they do, politician is one of them. And I think we live in a world where being a politician is difficult.
And honestly, I feel like stigmatized.
It is. I mean, we look at lawyers with a certain disdain because basically unless you need one and one is defending you or something like that, it's easy to think that they're out to get a lot of people, things like that. So, but it really is interesting to me to confront in myself the idea that in order to affect change, we can talk about a lot of things, but, writing your congressman, writing your senator, writing or participating in city council meetings, all of those different sorts of things that you can actually do because they are people, and they may not be reading everybody's Facebook page to see that thing that you posted about how frustrated and upset you are with certain aspects of something going on. And there are ways to participate in it.
Well, and it's interesting, there's that, I used to have a bumper sticker. It said, "Get involved. The world is run by those who show up." And one of the things that when I was doing a lot more of that activism work that I discovered is that people often write in when they're upset. They don't often write in when they like something.
Right.
So
that's just reviews in general. Go on Amazon and look up any product. You'll see a lot of 5-star reviews, and you might say works great. That's going to be on there all the time or whatever. But if there's ever a problem with something, you get a diatribe.
And politicians, right? Like they deal with that as well. They'll often hear when people don't like what's happening. And what that does is it means we're sort of giving people things to avoid rather than things to work for or towards. And in general, they aren't actually engaging with the representative, whoever it is, local, regional, national, as like you're saying, a person who might want to engage in some kind of human exchange around what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that's it's a great point to realize that these people who can sometimes feel two-dimensional or far away because of
or like they're just a whole different world.
Yeah,
like,
the parties and stuff.
Like Congress, even though they're representing the wants and needs of the people in Colorado, their constituents, but like they seem far away.
Right.
And they're not really a part of it.
And yet they are. They're here and they're affected by the same traffic and weather and school system policies that we are.
Exactly. And so to echo something I said in the show, get involved.
Yeah.
Do things.
Something.
And Facebook and Twitter rants don't count.
No, it's slacktivism.
Yeah. So that was my bike-carrying moment.
It's awesome. Mine is personal in that my younger child called a few weeks ago and said, "Hey, Mom, what do you think about me joining the Army?" And I really, on the one hand, of course, I'm going to support her in whatever activity, I guess not whatever activity, but the majority of the things that I imagine she would choose for her life. And in an objective sense, there's a lot about the Army that I think is a great fit for her. And actually, it's been a great experience. She did her due diligence. She talked to women she knew that had served in the Army and the armed forces. She took the tests that they offer and scored quite well. So they are going to put her in a cyber hacking position, which is like she loves computer science. So all of that's really positive.
Yeah. And
I've always had a pretty conflicted feeling around, the military industrial complex, if you will, and the ways in which I don't necessarily feel 100% comfortable with how we as a country engage in aggression. And so it's this moment of, and then, her dad, we were driving her to the airport. She came to visit for a little bit. She leaves for basic in like 5 days or something. And a few days after this cast will be put up. And her dad was like, I'm an Army dad. I'm like, you are an Army dad.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a pretty big transition.
It's not something I ever saw. And it's on the one hand, it's fine. I mean, I want her to live her life.
Did you have any family members that were in the military, older or cousins or anything?
My dad was in the Navy in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was also in the Navy in World War II.
So it does sort of run in the family.
It does. Skip this generation. I don't think anyone in my generation did the military thing. And it was a great moment too. Like I called my dad to tell him, and then I was talking to him last week and we're on the phone. And my dad's, as I've talked about before, he's a conservative Republican kind of cowboy, Christian, right? Like it's a different life than I have. And we were chatting on the phone, and he said, "How are you doing with this?"
Yeah. And
I said, "Well, it's a transition. I don't know if you can relate to your kid doing something completely out of the blue that totally surprises you." At which point he started laughing really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had a great empathy. I was like, it's the first time I think ever really I've had a certain kind of empathy for my parents, given the path that I've followed that is so very much not, I think, what they anticipated for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But that Bicurian moment for me of It's like that old joke, right? There's a judge and there's someone up for trial, and they're like, is the verdict guilty or not guilty? And the judge says, oh, it's my son. Like there's this third verdict that
Right.
exists. And absent of my daughter being in the Army, I have some political ideologies around it. Like I've always had a commitment to treating veterans well. I think whatever
Right.
I feel about,
That's one of those universal truths I think we should.
I don't know that that's always true though. Like I feel like there are people who feel
Vietnam set that up. Like
Yeah.
people that came back were somewhat mistreated because there was so much fervor against the war, and it sort of set that standard. In World War II, that was not the case, and that did transition, I think, between the 50s into the 80s.
Yeah,
Hopefully, we're on the right path to fix that. But
I've always felt like that we should, regardless of how I feel about the institution, I feel like we should treat the soldiers like they are people, as you were talking about in your moment.
well, I've been following the story, and it did make me think about something. And there are a lot of countries out there, and these are countries that I think are universally looked at as being pretty well put together and having good policies in general and a good world presence, and they have mandatory military service requirements. Some only for males, but some for male and female is optional. And the whole thing made me think, there's a lot of good that can come from it. Obviously, there's danger, and there's this, idea of sacrifice that can be involved. You're sacrificing some time out of your life at the very minimum. Where your decisions are no longer yours alone to be made, and so. But in a lot of regards, learning discipline and skills and things like that, there are positives. We've just got a very negative view of it these days, I think, because we have been involved in so many things that don't feel good from a national pride or service to the world aspect. But in general, I think most of the people I've met that have gone into the military have had a good experience and come back as a better person.
Yeah. When I was having some chats with some of my friends about, American hyper individualism, which I see as a real problem. And
Facebook wanted to know if you
I wanted to get donations.
if you'd like to get donations for your
the
cause
cause
against hyper individualism,
as
thus
an
proving
American
that
disease.
thus proving that the algorithms in Facebook and the language detection there, if you're trusting any of that, don't.
Yeah. However, when in a conversation around that, I said, the two institutions that I think of actually doing well at countering that are the military and churches, which is an ironic observation. So right now, there's this way in which I'm attempting the sort of the Bicurian part of this for me is attempting to kind of move myself into this new reality where, I'm an Army mom, and I never really envisioned that in any way in my life. So I'm like, okay, what does that look like? And how do I be this mom? And, and in some ways, I'm still just me. And then there's this other way in which I want to show up for this person that I care about. And I feel a little awkward and uncertain as to how to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's got to play out, and you're going to have an individual experience with it. And possibly you can talk to other people that have had the experience and get some insight.
Oh, I've been reading forums. Like I'm not, me. I'm like looking it up all the things and, and what do we do and graduation and.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's a uniquely shared experience, but you don't have anybody directly in your life that you've spoken to that I'm aware of.
No.
Ironically, you've spoken to friends of yours that have been in the military.
Yeah, like a lot of
your
my friends
age group
have been.
and things like that. So
Yeah, my best friend from high school in the Air Force, and a bunch of my friends now all served actually in the Army.
And from what
ways.
I know of them, they turned out pretty good. So
yeah, they're pretty great people. I mean, we're friends, so they got to be cool.
Well, good luck on your adventures, and good luck to your daughter.
Yeah, thanks, and good luck to you getting involved.
So, thanks for listening. If you have ideas, feedback, thoughts, please find us on social media, Bicurian on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Or you can always give us a call at 720-507-7309, or email us at podcast@bicurian.com. Thanks for listening.